Welcome back to part 3 of the follow along edit. In this part, we will be going over the color-based selection tools and working with layers uh, a little bit more. So let's get started. We're going to explore the object selection tool, quick select tool, and magic wand tool in this segment of the series. So let's go ahead and start with the magic wand tool. And I think we're going to work on the bucket to start with. So we're going to go up here and look at our tolerance. Our tolerance is how the tool actually works. It's a color-based tool and it examines the colors around it. So we're going to set that tolerance to 10. And I clicked on the bright yellow part and the tolerance is 10 so that it is only going to select the colors that are closest to the color that I picked in that 3x3 square average. And I'll show you that 3x3 square average in a second. So I changed the tolerance to 32 and it's a little bit more accepting as far as the color of yellow that it's going to select. As you can see, it went to the darker yellow. Okay, so what I meant by that 3x3 average area that I was selecting from is it's taking a 3x3 average size of the pixels and the area that or the contents of that area, and Photoshop is examining that and then comparing the pixels around it and is selecting the similar pixels. So we have our options of point sample, which means it's only going to select the similar shades or hues of the color that is actually on that point of selection for me. And as you can see on that list, there are larger numbers or a larger area of sampling that will allow you to get a bigger selection. So if we go all the way down to the 101 by 101 average, that is going to actually sample a larger area, and then in combination with the tolerance of 32, it's going to sample more. And as you can see, there is a little bit of a yellow hue or tint on the blanket, and because I clicked on the bucket and my 101 by 101 average was selected, as well as 32, it selected part of the blanket as well, because it was reading that yellow hue on the blanket. Okay, so as you can see, I've gone up to the top in my menu bar a couple of times, and I've gone from using just the single square box to clicking on the double square box. And in my mind, so remember previously, those were to say whether you're going to do a single selection, and every time you click and make a new selection, it's independent of each other, versus that second double box um, is an automatic add to the selection. Your cursor is always in the add selection mode. And for me, that's just easier to use because I always, like between Alt and Shift, I always get them mixed up as Shift is add, Alt is minus, and just fingers. And it frustrates me sometimes when I subtract instead of add, and then I add instead of subtract. So I always have it on the add mode, and then all I have to worry about is subtracting. That's just easier for me. You can do what you want, but that's just me. Okay, moving on. I already have a selection made in the main part of the bucket, and because I went back down to my 3x3 average, I still left my tolerance to 32 and clicked on the outside of the bucket. It only selected the bucket for me because my point sample or my sample area was much smaller. But as you can see, not everything was selected. So I have to go in and click on the different shades and hues in order to get those selected. For example, the eyes and the cheeks were not included because they weren't yellow. They're black and red. So now I'm going to use another selection tool, and in this case, I think I'm going to go with my magnetic selection tool, my magnetic lasso tool, and I'm going to change to do the additional, make it to do an automatic addition to my selection instead of me having to remember to do the shift key and accidentally getting rid of my selection and having to do Control Z and all of that. So I'm just going around and following the edge of the bucket so that I can get more of the bucket into my selection. And some of it's already selected, but I'm still going to just follow around because there are parts along that selection line that are not included. But then there's also parts that are. So I'm just going to cut across and go from there. Okay, and as you can see, I cut across below those two white spots when I should have probably gone over them, because if I would have gone over them, I would have included them instead of not. So I'm gonna go, oops, I just moved my selection instead of adding to it because I didn't have I wasn't allowing for the tool to add. So I'm just going to circle around those, and now it's added into my selection. I could have probably done that with the magnetic tool, but the lasso tool is a little bit easier to use for that particular instance. So I've zoomed in and I'm double checking all of my edges to see if I have completed my selection as much as I could. And I'm using the lasso tool here to just follow along the edge free-handedly. But as you can see, I went a little bit too far coming back to my original starting point. So I'm going to use my Alt key to do a minus and just follow along that edge and get rid of that little bit of a selection that I don't need on the blanket. Okay, and that looks pretty good. So I'm going to do my space bar and move the screen a little bit, find another part of the edge, and just circle that. Yep, that looks good. There's another part. The lasso tool is great for this if you're not looking for like exact, which I mean, it's exact enough for what we're doing. If this was a professional job, I'd be way more nitpicky on my selection. Okay, so now I'm thinking I want to use a different tool to continue with my selections. And as you can see, I'm going from the magnetic tool, and I think I'm going to explore the quick selection tool. The quick selection tool is another color-based selection tool that is kind of like a brush. And in the center of the brush is a plus or minus sign for addition to the selection or a subtraction from the selection. And also, that plus or minus sign is going to be your point sample in which you are selecting the color or the hue in which Photoshop is to compare the pixels around in order to make the selection. I hope that makes sense. It might be a little bit more clear once you have a visual. So let's go ahead and start using this tool. Okay, and as you can see, the brush is super tiny because the last time I used this, I had a size 2. You can go up to the menu bar and you can either slide your slider over to adjust the size, or you can, oops, I just made a selection I didn't want, Control Z, or you can use your left and right brackets to adjust the size of the brush visually. And just like with all the other selection tools, up here in the shortcut menu bar, there are the options to have the brush set to an always independent selection, an always addition to the selection, or an always subtraction to the selection as far as the tool goes. I'm going to use the middle one, which is always going to add to my selection so that I don't have to do the Alt or the Shift key all the time. If I want to subtract, I just use the Alt because otherwise it's just going to add for me automatically, which is usually what I want to do. Okay, back to selecting. Okay, so with this tool, you can either click and drag or just click once. I'm going to click and drag and sample all of this area. But as you can see, the plus sign went onto that white area that's in between the yellow, so it added to my selection. So I'm going to zoom in for a little bit more precision, hold down my Alt key, and click once. And because it sampled that white area, it took it out for me. And now I'm going to be a little bit more nitpicky, and there's going to be some spots where it's not going to be exact, but that's okay because we're not going to really see that. Okay, so now I'm going to hold down my spacebar key as I click and drag so that I can see the rest of my image. And from here, I'm going to use a different tool to get a better selection because as you can see, the side of the bucket isn't completely selected. So I went with my magnetic tool to start with, and I'm going to click and drag and see if I can get that edge. But because there's not enough contrast between the edge of the bucket and the blanket in the background, it's not picking it up. So I'm going to backspace and I'm going to use the magnetic tool to try to work with Photoshop and click and drop points myself to make this selection, but that's not really working either. So I'm going to hit Escape on my keyboard to get rid of the selection completely, and I'm going to select a different tool. I'm going to go with the Polygonal tool, and I'm going to click and oops, okay, so my selection went away because my Polygonal tool is set to do an independent selection instead of to do an addition to the selection all the time, how I prefer it. So I'm just going to select that area and clean that up a little bit. Press my space bar again and move the screen around so that I can see all of the edges. And here's another one that it might be okay, but I'm going to select it just anyway. And I'm just making a random shape selection around it just so that I can get what I want selected. And I'm going to go to my lasso tool, and really this is probably because of the blanket, but there's the edge, and I'm just going to freehand take away that selection so that edge is just a little bit more clean and circular. And as we zoom out, that looks pretty dang good. Okay, so after making sure that the background copy layer is active, I'm going to copy and paste, and then go to my move tool, zoom out, and I'm going to move that bucket over, and just to confirm that I actually did get a copy and pasted bucket. And as you can see, the bucket is behind the book, and that is because the book layer is above the bucket layer. So let's move the bucket layer above the book layer and then rename that so that we know what is what going forward before we forget. And now we're going to move the book layer above the bucket layer. And because the bucket layer is impeding the monkey, which is what we want to work on next, I'm going to hide the bucket layer that I just created. It didn't go anywhere, it's still there, but now I can work on the monkey with the quick select tool. So let's go ahead and try that. And we're going to zoom in a little bit and get the monkey kind of isolated in the screen. And I'm going to make my quick select tool a little bit bigger so it covers more area. And I'm going to go up and make sure that I'm on the addition. So if I need to click once and click once, I can without it making independent selections. Oops, and I forgot that I wasn't on the correct layer, so the selection didn't appear. So I went to the correct layer, and now it's appearing. And we're just going to go ahead and click in certain areas of this monkey and click and drag. As you can see, because some of the shadow is the same color as the monkey, some of the blanket is being included in the selection when we go down. And sometimes you will lose your selection at random. Not quite sure what happened here. But we're going to undo, undo, undo until the selection comes back, and then we can just start over. Well, not necessarily start over, because some of the selection is still there, but we can continue on making selections. So I'm just clicking and dragging until all of the monkey is selected. And as you can see, there's parts of the blanket that's selected that I don't want. So in order to get rid of that, I'm going to zoom in, get to the area that I want. I'm going to decrease the size of my brush for more precision. I'm going to hold down the Alt key to get the minus sign, and then I'm going to go around the edge here and deselect what I don't want. And it works in the same fashion. I'm just going over the parts that are selected, but because I have the Alt key depressed as I'm doing this, it's taking away or subtracting from the selection. And every once in a while, you're going to have outlying, like right there, that's still selected, and that's okay. You can take the lasso tool, hold down the Alt key so you get the subtraction mode, and then you can just go around that, and bam, it's gone. And then you can go back to the magic wand tool and continue on. We'll do the space bar to move, and we'll do the same thing for this part of the blanket. Hold down the Alt key, click and drag, and it's not going to be very precise, and every once in a while it's going to deselect stuff that you don't want deselected. So because we have the always add select option going, we can just subtract and then add very easily. And the only key that you need to press is the Alt key to subtract. That's my preference. It makes things a lot easier for me. But everybody does it different. So I'm just going back in here and I'm adding and subtracting as needed. We're going to clean this up. And this is a little bit of the hazard of the quick select tool, is it's not as precise as some other tools, especially when you have multiple hues and not a very clean background as far as the white goes. So obviously it's not white. So when I'm clicking and dragging in the white area to subtract it from my selection, because there's kind of the same hues or shades in the monkey, it thinks that I want to deselect some of the monkey too. This can get very frustrating. So we're going to go to a different tool, and we'll try the Magnetic Lasso tool on here and see how that does. And again, I'm holding down the Alt key, and there's just a little bit there, so I want to go around that little bit. I'm going to click and drag drop points so I can include that in my deselection. And then I'm just going to follow along the edge of the monkey here. And because there's enough contrast in some of the areas, this is actually working pretty nicely. The only downside to this is the monkey has kind of a feathered edge, or a soft edge, if you will, but using this Magnetic Lasso tool is going to create a hard and infinite edge. Well, not infinite, that's probably the wrong word, but it's going to create a hard edge, which is going to look funny, and you'll see that in just a second. And we can control that up in the shortcut menu with the feather option. Right now it's set at 0 pixels, but if I were to put that at 5 or 10 pixels, then the hard edge that you will see in just a minute would be a lot softer and blend in a little bit more, and then the tool would probably be a little bit more appropriate. So let's continue on with our selection so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so continuing on with the selection, we're just going to follow the edge of the monkey's arm here, and when I get to the corner, I'm going to just click and drop a couple of anchor points myself, just because it's easier than waiting for Photoshop to try to figure out what it needs to do. And I'm just going to follow along here, follow along, and then don't want to stop here. I'm going to go back and make the edge just a little bit more obvious where the leg is. Okay, and now I'm going to come down here, and I think that's about where I want to stop. So I'm going to drop a point and then go back to the beginning so that I can complete the selected area. And then as you can see, under the arm is now deselected. So now I'm going to spacebar and look at the rest of it, zoom out, and I think that's pretty good. So the background layer background copy layer is active. I've copied and pasted. Now I'm going to go to my move tool and move my monkey over so that I can visually check and make sure that the selection happened how I wanted it. And there's my other layer right there. I'm going to rename it, but as I'm kind of looking at the screen here, I notice that not only is the arm's edge on the inside arm a little hard and not as soft as the rest of the selection, there's also some areas that were included in the selection that I don't want around the head. Let's zoom in and take a look at that. And I don't know what can I help you with? I don't know how that happened. Let's get rid of that. Okay, spacebar, click and drag so that I can see my monkey and the area up closer. And as you can see, close to the ear on both sides, and also on the other side of the head, there's selections that I was not aware of, and we need to get rid of those. And then also you can compare the inner edge of the arm, which is kind of a hard edge, and if you look at the top of the arm, it's a little bit of a softer edge. And that's because two different tools were used. The Quick Select tool gave it a little bit of a feather, and the Magnetic Lasso tool had a very hard edge. And oops, I moved my background copy layer a little bit. I don't know what I did or when I did that. So, let's fix that. Hold on just a second. Let's go up to the history. Instead of doing Control Z. Oh, okay, so it must have been the last thing I did. So let's do it. I did a Control Z to undo that. And then a Control Z to undo the move of the monkey, I'm sure. And then we're going to go back to our Quick Select tool and start our selection over. And we're going to zoom in, move around so I can get a better look, get my tool going, make my selection again. We're just going through this one more time. And this is actually going a little bit better than it was last time. And it's hit and miss. I don't know why. It's just how Photoshop operates as to how good or bad it's going to be. You can, it'll be great one time. You'll deselect everything, go through it again to try to do it again. Not make a whole lot of changes to your brush or brush size like I just did there, and it'll work just great. So, I mean, it's all It's all relative, I guess. So that's pretty good. We'll go down and do this other leg. Great. Make sure we got the ears. A little bit of the hair on the outside. Oops, that was a little too much right there, but that's okay. We'll fix that in just a second, and we need to get that out of there too, that it has the blanket selected. So I clicked once just to test, clicked again, and it connected everything. I'm going to click, so I'm just doing single clicks in here because that seems to work a little bit better than if I'm doing a click and a drag. Although every once in a while a click and a drag works. So I've zoomed out so I can get a better look. Zoom back in and continue on subtracting from our selection area for things that we don't want, and then adding for things that we do want. And we'll just take our time going through here. That might be being a little too finicky, but I just want to show you the capacity of this tool and how picky it can be itself. Going up, going up. Everything looks good down there now. Let's work on the head and the ears. Things are looking great. All right, let's go over and add a little bit more to this ear. Okay, and there is an option up top that says Enhance Edge, and I probably should have had that selected to start with, and that might allow a little bit more of a more accurate edge. But as you can see, in doing that, Photoshop takes a minute to think a little longer. So this is going to delay some of your selection process or slow down, but it might actually help a little bit better as far as getting closer to the edge without actually well, I don't know. I was going to say disturbing the edge, but that's not the right word. But uh, getting a little bit more of a refined edge, I guess you will, for like all of these little hair edges. Because this monkey is not just a straight uh, cardboard cutout. There's fabric there. There's hair there. So anyway, I think that looks pretty good now. So we're on the background layer copy. And we're going to Control C and Control V for copy and paste. And now we've got a second layer with the monkey on it. I'm going to move it over and confirm that the selection was done a little bit better this time, but oops, I missed a little piece at the ear here, and that can be fixed later. And there's a little bit up there again. Let's zoom in so that we can see this a little bit closer. Well, actually, that might be part, oh no, it's not. I thought that was part of the octopus there for a second, but it is part of the monkey. And there's a little bit right there that is not quite right. And some of this doesn't really matter, but, and oh, hey, I just realized that I was moving layer 1 and not layer 2. So layer 1 was the first monkey, and layer 2 is the second monkey. So let's move layer 2. There it is. And as you probably noticed right off the bat, we're missing an eye on the second monkey. So I'm actually just going to delete layer 2 because layer 1 is good enough for me for what we're doing here. Again, if this was a professional job, I would have deleted layer 1 again and started all over. So let's see, let's double check. We've got 2 books. We've done the octopus, we've done the ball, we've done the monkey, and we've done the bucket. And I'm going to make everything visible just as a visual double check. The only thing we haven't done yet is the rattle over here on the left side. So let's go ahead and do that next, and we're going to use a different tool. We're going to go into the last color-based selection tool that we need to talk about, and it's the object selection tool. And this tool is kind of new, and well, it's not new, but it's been refined in the last few years, and it is great. It saves so much time in my editing process these days. So what the object select tool is it's basically Photoshop is working almost completely 100% for you in finding the object in your image. To do this, Photoshop analyzes everything in your image, or at least on the background copy, and it finds the different parts and pieces that stand out or that have the most contrast in your image to mark them as subjects. It's basically an algorithm working in the background for you. So actually, it's probably easier to see how this works. So let's go ahead and dive in and get started on the rattle. Okay, so I'm going to select my selection tool, and then I'm going to make sure that my background copy is the layer that's active so that I can make my selection. And up here, this little spinning arrow means that Photoshop is examining my image to find the subjects. And I can go ahead and click and drag and make a selection, and Photoshop is working to only select the subject. And as you can see, let's zoom in here just a little bit. Only the rattle is selected. Oh, and what is that blue thing? That blue is also Photoshop telling me what the subject is. And you can get that blue hover over if you have Object Finder selected. If you don't have it selected, then it doesn't turn blue. But that's just an easy way for you to visually see what Photoshop is considering to be your subject. And so once that object is blue, and if you want to select it, you just click once, and whatever is blue will be selected. Okay. So now I've got my move tool here, and oh, I was going to do a copy and paste, but as you can see here, there's parts that I don't want to be selected. I'm going to show you why. So I did a copy and paste. I'm going to zoom out, and I'm going to move the rattle over to this bucket on the background layer. And as you can see, there's still white parts in this little circles there. I don't want those. I want the rattle to look see-through, just like it would be in real life. So we're going to get rid of that. I'm going to go up here to the history and go back to my selection, object selection. I could have just hit Control Z twice and that would have undone the move and undone the paste, but this is just a little bit faster and I can see exactly where I'm going to go. So I'm back to my selection. Let's zoom in. And we're going to use a different tool to deselect the holes, if you will. And I'm just clicking once in here, and because I have the Enhance Edge option up in my shortcut menu selected, Photoshop is working for me to find the edge of where I want to select, or it's finding the contrast, because remember, this is a color-based selection tool. It's finding the contrast in the image, and then it's selecting the most obvious color differences to make my edge. And we're just going to go through here and quickly do a select, and this is actually working great. Sometimes the quick select tool can be a pain, like oops, right there, it just undid everything for me. Let's do a deselect, and we'll use a different tool for that. But for right now, it is working great. Okay, let's zoom in a little bit. I did a Control plus, and we'll make the brush size just a little bit smaller so it's a little bit more precise. There we go, and go up, click and drag up, and oops, okay, Photoshop thought a little bit too much for me and deselected everything, I think. But I'm also not on the background copy layer anymore either. I was on the ball 2 layer. So let's go back to the background copy layer, zoom back in, move the image. Okay, we'll try this one right here. I just clicked once, clicked and drag, and because that shadow is kind of the same color as the rattle, or it has the same hue as the rattle, it's deselecting more than what I want, and it worked in that little hole there that time. So I'm just going to go back and forth here and just double check and see what all I can do with this quick select tool here as far as deselecting or subtracting from my selection on the rattle so that I can make this a little bit more lifelike, or not lifelike, but a little bit more realistic. That's okay, I think. Nah, we'll get rid of that and zoom in a little bit more so we can get a little bit more precise. And again, for some reason, I got off the layer. I'm sure it's just a keystroke that I'm making that I'm not aware of. We'll go back in with a smaller brush, and that's a little bit better for what we're doing, but I'm being a little picky. There we go. All right, that's much better. Okay, we'll come in here, fix this up a little bit. And again, I'm probably just being too damn picky. Come in here and get rid of this one. All right, that looks pretty good. All right, let's go back down to the bottom of the rattle and we'll get this hole right here taken care of, and then we should be ready to move on. Oops, all right, that just deselected a lot. Control Z. We'll do little bits at a time. Oops, dang it. All right, Control Z. We're gonna have to use a different tool for this. I am going to do the Magnetic Lasso tool because I think there's enough contrast. I'm going to hold down my Alt key and follow the edge of that rattle there. And as you can see, this is actually working much better. I probably should have done this to start with. But for those bigger areas, it worked great. So maybe it would have been okay to do what I did to start with. And then once I got to these smaller areas, to go ahead and switch over to this tool. But you don't know that until sometimes you get into it as to whether or not you need to use a different tool or not. A lot of photo editing is just trial and error, whether you're just doing basic stuff like this or once you get into the more advanced composite stuff. It's just trial and error as to what's going to work best for you. Oh, and I think I was adding to the selection instead of subtracting, so we're going to try that again. There we go. That's better. Okay, and then this little bit right here. Bam. Oh, that's nice. Beautiful. All right, and let's just double check one more time. Go up here, take a look at the top of the rattle. Let's just get a little bit more precise. Make these corners how they should be. All right, that looks a little bit better. And there's this one little area right here that you probably wouldn't even notice otherwise, but I think it'll look good and be a lot better if we can get that out of there. All right. And let's just clean up this little spot right here a little bit more. And again, I'm just being too picky because I am just not kind of an editor. And we'll zoom out, take a look at that. All right, I think we're looking good. We're on the background copy layer. Just do a Control C, Control V, paste. Got our layer 2, new layer, move tool. Do a Control 0 to go back to full screen and move that puppy up there. Look at that. We can see through. That's a little bit more realistic. And now let's rename that layer as Rattle. So we know what's going forward. And oops, we forgot to name our monkey layer. Let's go ahead and name the monkey layer as well. And now everything is nice and organized for moving forward. All right, let's get rid of the background copy and we can see all of the stuff that we have. Okay, so we have everything except our background finished, and that will be coming up next in part 4.